Hello everyone, I'm Justin, and this is a full recap of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, released in 1971. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. Based on the 1964 novel written by Roald Dahl titled Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, although it's since become a cult classic, was actually a box office flop back when it released in theaters 52 years ago, with it bringing in only $4 million on a budget of $3 million, and disappointing its production and distribution company, Paramount, so much that they refused to renew the film's copyright, and allowed it to instead be picked up by Warner Bros. In 1977, who'd then sell the tape to TV stations during the 80s and 90s, through which the film gained its huge following. Now, in 2023, a new Willy Wonka film will be hitting theaters on December 15th titled Wonka, which will actually be serving as a prequel to the original movie, with Timothe Chalamet starring as a young Willy Wonka, originally played by Gene Wilder. So, before the new film, we've decided to take a look back at the original Wonka film, in addition to also looking back on the 2005 remake in our next video, so be on the lookout for that. The movie opens with a group of kids, following dismissal from school, running over to their local candy shop where the owner, Bill, serves them chocolate and presents them with Willy Wonka's latest creation, a scrumdiddlyumptious bar, before explaining through song how Wonka's candy is revolutionary. And as he sings, we see Charlie Bucket watching through the window before meeting with newsagent Mr. Jopek, who Charlie works for as a paper delivery boy, and from whom he receives his first weekly paycheck, which Charlie promptly uses to buy him and his family, including his mother, his Grandpa George, Grandma Georgina, Grandma Josephine, and Grandpa Joe, a loaf of bread, which his mother describes as a real banquet, since they've just been surviving off cabbage water for quite some time due to her being the only one providing for the family up to this point, since Charlie's father is no longer around and his grandparents have all been bedridden for the last 20 years. Charlie then gives the rest of his pay to his mother, although he does hold on to a small amount to buy his Grandpa Joe's tobacco. But Joe says he won't need it since he's giving up tobacco, claiming if a loaf of bread looks like a banquet, then he's got no right buying tobacco. Charlie insists he take the money though, so he does. That night, Charlie tells Joe about an altercation he'd had on his way home earlier, explaining that he'd stopped by the gates of Willy Wonka's factory and was met by a mysterious tinker, who told him that nobody ever goes in and nobody ever comes out before walking away. And Joe confirms this to be true, revealing that years ago, all the other chocolate makers in the world were sending in spies to steal Wonka's secret recipes, especially Arthur Slugworth, who Joe describes as the worst of them all. And so, in response, Willy Wonka shut down his factory completely. But suddenly, 3 years later, the factory started working again, and more delicious candies were coming out than ever. But still, the gate stayed locked, so no one could ever steal his recipes again. Sometime following this discussion though, it's suddenly announced to the world that Willy Wonka will actually be reopening his factory, although only to the 5 lucky people who find his golden tickets packaged inside Wonka bars, who will then be giving a full tour of the factory, along with a lifetime supply of chocolate. Charlie and his family, unfortunately, only have enough money for a single bar though, which they give to Charlie for his birthday. And although he and Grandpa Joe have high hopes that he'll be one of the lucky winners, upon opening it, he's disappointed to find just the chocolate inside. Over the next few weeks, 4 of the 5 tickets are eventually found, with the first being found by an overweight boy with a hobby for eating, Augustus Gloop from Dosselheim, Germany, the second found by Veruca Salt, a very spoiled English girl, the third found by Violet Beauregard, a gum-chewing enthusiast, and the fourth being found by TV addict Mike TV. And strangely, shortly following each child's victories are announced, they're met by a strange man whispering in each of their ears and seemingly piquing their interests. As the search for the 5th ticket continues, Charlie meets with his mother while at work and expresses his disappointment in not being able to find the golden ticket. But his mother explains that, even if he had a sack full of money, he'd still probably never find one, and that after all this, he'll be no different from the billions of others who didn't. Still, he insists he is different, believing he wants it more than anyone. So she comforts him, telling him that one day, things will change when he least expects it. Sadly for Charlie though, it seems the search has officially ended, as it's announced that Paraguayan millionaire Alberto Mignoletta has found the final golden ticket. And so, a saddened Charlie goes back to life as usual, until later that day, he finds some money on the street, and decides to buy himself a scrumdiddlyumptious bar and a Wonka bar for his grandfather with it. However, upon leaving the store, he overhears that the millionaire faked the ticket, and that the real one is still out there. So Charlie opens up his Wonka bar and is shocked to see the real, fifth and final golden ticket inside. He then races home until he's stopped suddenly by that same strange man who had spoken to all the other kids, who now introduces himself to Charlie as Arthur Slugworth, and explains that at this moment, Willy Wonka is working on a fantastic invention called the Everlasting Gobstopper, and that if he succeeds, it will ruin him. So he asks Charlie to bring him one so that he could find the secret formula. And in exchange, he'll give Charlie enough money to find a new house for his family, as well as food and comfort for the rest of their lives. Following this, Charlie arrives home with the ticket and brings it to his family, who read it together and learn that Charlie's also allowed to bring one family member to the factory along with him. So Charlie asks his Grandpa Joe to join him, and although he hasn't been out of bed in years, he's able to get up on his feet and accept, as well as even sing a little song. The next day, all 5 children and their guardians arrive at the factory and are eventually met by Mr. Willy Wonka, who leads them towards an NDA that's font gets smaller and smaller towards the bottom, claiming all the kids must sign or they won't be allowed in the factory. So, although the parents are skeptical, all the children inevitably sign. They then follow him through a door and into a cramped room, where they remain for a moment before Wonka reopens the door and reveals a different hallway to be behind it, that gets smaller and smaller as you walk down it towards the entrance of the factory's nerve center, where almost everything is edible, which they promptly enter. Once inside, everyone begins exploring and eating all the delicious candies and desserts the room has to offer, before eventually discovering Wonka's chocolate river and waterfall, across from which they see little orange men who, Wonka explains, are actually Oompa Loompas from Loompa Land, a land full of desolate wastes and fierce beasts where Oompa Loompas would get gobbled up. So Wonka transported the entire population of Oompa Loompas to his factory, where they can live in peace and safety, while helping him create delicious candies. Meanwhile, Augustus, who had been drinking from Wonka's chocolate river despite Wonka's orders not to, suddenly falls in, and is eventually sucked into a pipe that shoots him up to the fudge room. So Wonka calls over an Oompa Loompa to bring Augustus's mother there in order to find him, but advises them to look sharp, as Augustus could potentially get poured into the boiler. And following this, the Oompa Loompas sing a song about how important it is to not be greedy. The tour continues soon after this, with Wonka introducing the group to his boat, the Wonkatania, and together they make their way into the Tunnel of Terror, which frightens all the guests, before making a sudden stop at the inventing room, where Wonka presents to them his everlasting gobstoppers, which all the kids promptly ask for a piece of, so he hands each of them one, but makes them swear to only keep it for themselves and never show it to another living soul as long as they live, which they seemingly all agree to. Although, Veruca keeps her fingers crossed behind her back. Next, Wonka shows them a piece of gum that he explains is supposed to resemble the flavor of a 3-course meal, but claims he hasn't got it quite right yet. Still though, Violet snatches the gum from his hand and begins chewing away, describing the multiple flavors before arriving at the meal's 3rd course, the blueberry pie. But we soon see that's the part Wonka was struggling with, as she begins turning into a literal blueberry. So once again, Wonka calls over an Oompa Loompa and tells them to roll Violet down to the juicing room with her father, so she can be squeezed back to normal before she explodes. And coinciding with her exit is another Oompa Loompa song explaining the importance of good manners. Following this, as well as a taste of Wonka's lickable wallpaper, he shows them his fizzy lifting drinks that, when consumed, lift you off the ground like a balloon, but says it's too powerful to drink, so he insists they move along with the tour. Charlie and his grandfather, though, once Wonka and the rest of the group leave the room, decide to stay back and sneak a sip of the drink anyway, which promptly lifts them up into the air. But although fun at first, it soon becomes frightening, as they realize they're heading straight towards the ceiling fan and are unable to stop. But before they're chopped to bits, Joe realizes that burping actually lowers them to the ground. So the two burp over and over until they finally make it back to the floor and eventually meet back up with the rest of the group, as they're being shown Wonka's quadruple-sized geese who lay golden eggs, which are each then placed onto the eggicator that determines whether it's a good or bad egg and has to be dropped into the garbage chute. Upon seeing the geese, Veruca demands that her father gift her one, but Wonka claims they aren't for sale, so she begins making several demands through song while trashing the room, but makes the mistake of stepping onto the eggicator, which determines she's a bad egg and sends her down the chute, with her father following her down soon after, before again the Oompa Loompas sing their song, this time about the importance of good parenting. Continuing on with the tour again, as Wonka introduces the remaining few to the Wonkamobile, that begins bursting with bubbles as they ride, but they're quickly cleaned through the Wonka wash to their next stop, his latest and greatest invention, Wonka Vision, which is capable of sending a chocolate bar from one end of the room to the other onto a television screen. But immediately after seeing this, Mike jumps onto the machine and starts it to send himself into the TV screen, just like the chocolate bar, resulting in him becoming extremely small. So Wonka tells his mother that he'll have to be put into his taffy pulling machine to be elongated. And for the final time, the Oompa Loompas sing their song, explaining the importance of reading. Now with the tour over, Wonka abruptly says goodbye to Charlie and Grandpa Joe before heading into his office. So they follow him inside and find him seated alone at his desk, frustrated. And after Joe asks about Charlie's lifetime supply of chocolate, Wonka appears to lose his temper, as he claims he won't be receiving it due to them having broken the rules of the contract, which he angrily recites by taking an unauthorized sip of his fizzy lifting drinks. So they will be getting nothing and have lost. His words lead a heartbroken Joe to call Wonka a crook and an inhuman monster for building up Charlie's hopes and dreams just to leave them smashed into pieces, before then attempting to leave with Charlie and meet with Slugworth so they can share their everlasting gobstopper with him. But Charlie stops and instead leaves the candy on Wonka's desk behind him. Wonka's mood then completely shifts, and with Charlie now having proven himself trustworthy, Wonka picks him up for a big hug and tells him he won, before revealing the mysterious man that had met with him earlier wasn't the real Slugworth, but was actually an employee of Wonka's named Mr. Wilkinson, sent to test Charlie and the other kids. Wonka then brings Charlie and Joe to the Wonkavator, which he explains has a button to every room in the factory, all of which he's pressed before except one, that he now allows Charlie to press for the first time, and which sends them up and out of the factory, flying above the town. And during their flight, Wonka reveals that Charlie's real prize is his entire chocolate factory, as Wonka feels his time at the factory is winding down, so he'll leave it to Charlie and his family to live there together. And the two then share another embrace as the movie ends with the three continuing their travel through the sky. And that was our recap of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful in any way, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be coming out with a recap of the 2005 remake in the coming days, so be on the lookout for that. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.